Smash that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and like the video. This is the FarmBoy's podcast with Paul Coffman, former Kansas State walk-on, all the way to the Green Bay Packers Hall of Fame and three-time Pro Bowler.
You know, you don't have to be the biggest, strongest, fastest, smartest, best looking. You can be just a guy, but I always say you need a living example of somebody who's done what you want to do. My name is Paul Coffman. I grew up in a town of 600 people. My dad was a wheat farmer and a school teacher. He would wake up at 5 a.m, go out and plow till 7:30, put on his suit and tie, and teach biology, chemistry, and physics till 3:30, and go back out in the field and plow till the work was done. So I felt I had the best combination of hard work and education. And my hometown, I tell people I graduated in the top 10 of my class. There was only 20. There was only 20 in it, but it was small. As a kid, I hurt my elbow, and I had it operated on, and this arm only straightens this far. I don't know if you can see it all there, but only bends this far. And then same thing happened to this arm. It only straightens this far and only bends that far. And when you grow up in a town of 500 people, your doctor is also your veterinarian. So you don't know exactly what you're getting, but he told me I'd be fine as long as I didn't play football. I said, and Doc, I got to play football. And so I wore a kind of went to a place that made prosthesis, and they made me a brace for my right arm. And then after a while, it got beat up and I threw it away. But so I didn't get any scholarships to college. So I walked on to Kansas State University. We weren't a very good football team at the time. I earned a scholarship. Well, actually, after my first semester, the coach called me in, and first of all, when he was recruiting me, he said, Paul Coffman, he said, you're going to be a fine ball player here at Kansas State University. But they just one thing wrong. I done give away all my scholarships. I said, well, Coach Gibson, maybe I ought to go to junior college. I'll get some size, some experience, and then I'll come up here. He said, no. He said, we'll run off some boys during 2 days. He said, you'll get yourself a scholarship in no time. I was too naive to realize actually what that meant. So as a walk-on, you're basically the dummy. You're the meat squad for the guys that are actually going to play on Saturday. So I got knocked out, never been knocked out before, got stitches in my chin one day. And, coach said, yeah, I need 4 or 5 stitches. We get it after practice. I thought after practice, I'm going to bleed to death, but stuck it out. At the end of the year, he said he was going to give me a scholarship for the next semester. I go home over Christmas and pick up the Hutchinson, Kansas newspaper, and headlines on the sports page was Coach Vince Gibson gets fired. And so when I came back, I didn't have a scholarship. So they had a new coaching staff, and I went through spring ball, finally got a scholarship my second year. My junior and senior year at Kansas State, we only won 1 game. And so there was only one guy on our team that was deemed a NFL type player, and he was a linebacker by the name of Gary Spaney that just happened to be my roommate. And so back then they didn't have the combine where they would bring players in, time them, weigh them, measure them, test them. Coaches would come to the different universities. So Gary would tell me, hey, Green Bay's coming on Friday. St. Louis will be here next Wednesday. LA will be here the following week. So I would show up and say, hey, Gary and I are roommates. We're workout partners. You're only working out one guy. Can I go through the workouts too? Well, the story I got was the linebacker coach, John Meyer from Green Bay. They're sitting in a meeting, and Bart Starr, the head coach, said, looking at the roster, says, you mean to tell me we only got 2 tight ends coming to minicamp? We're going to kill our starter. Back then there was no off-season programs. Guys had jobs in the off-season. He said, did any of you work out any tight ends? And the linebacker coach said, yeah, I worked out this kid at Kansas State. He won't make the team, but he won't embarrass us. So they called me up, offered me a $1,000 signing bonus, a contract of $24,000 the first year and $30,000 the second. Denver had also called and wanted me to come out there, and they were going to offer me more money. And I thought my best chance was in Green Bay, but I wanted to make sure I had enough money to re-enroll back in college to finish my degree if I didn't make the team. So I told the guy in Green Bay, I said, look, I'm going to have $2,500 to sign. Bowden went silent. I'm thinking, oh crap, I've messed this up. He goes, we'll give you $1,500. I said, okay, real quick, because I didn't want to piss him off. So 217, 6'3", 217-pound tight end, showed up to camp, lost down to 212 during camp, and we had to weigh in and out of every practice. So I went and got a 5-pound weight from the weight room, put it in my jock and some big double X large shorts. So I'd have 5 pounds more because I was afraid they'd cut me. But, 217, you got wide receivers now that are, bigger than that. But by the grace of God, I was in the right place, the right time. Bart Starr as the head coach, Lynn Dickey as the quarterback. Had a couple wide receivers, James Lofton and John Jefferson, and again, the hard work, the education, both paid off. And by the time I left Green Bay, I was I am still the all-time leading receiving tight end in Green Bay Packer history. I've caught more passes for more yards and more touchdowns than any other tight end in Green Bay Packer history. And in 1994, was inducted into the Green Bay Packer Hall of Fame.
Awesome.
Yeah, but what I'm most proud of, I've been married to the same woman for 40 years. I have 4 kids that all played Division I college sports and are all productive citizens in life. They got their college degree, and I'm just so blessed to have that. If I had Pro Bowls, Super Bowls, Hall of Fames, and didn't have this family situation, none of that would have been worth it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Paul, for joining me today. Appreciate your time and definitely appreciate that background. That's wild. I had different questions in mind to start off with, but you show me your arm and it can only extend so much.
Correct.
Boy, did you ever struggle with catching passes then? I mean, I guess your quarterback learned that, hey, I can't lead this guy too far, right?
Yeah, they throw the ball. They're under pressure. Lynn Dickey claims that he stuck the ball in my face mask, so all I had to do was pull it out. But people ask me that. Said, well, gosh, again, I must not have had any problem because I've caught more passes than any other tight end in Packer history. But it's just one of those things. You read about amputees running marathons and people with limitations, handicaps, doing incredible things, and you just have to learn how to adjust with what you got.
Yeah. So that's actually awesome. That's what a testament that you had that, but you're still the all-time leading tight end there. If you can kind of just take some of us fans back to what the locker room was like in the 80s. Recently had on actually a defensive end that went to tight end in the NFL of all places, which is crazy to me. He was a former Packer for a couple of years, got to play with Rodgers there. And he talked about what the locker room was like, in the 2000s. But I think a lot of people are probably more interested in, hey, what was a locker room like in the 80s? Whether it's a Packer, whoever it is, but I just think it'd be fascinating to hear what that's like.
Well, in 1978 is when I got there.
Okay.
There was an ashtray on probably half the lockers, and close to half the team smoked. I remember walking into the locker room. We had a linebacker by the name of Jim Carter from the University of Minnesota. He actually replaced Nitschke after Nitschke retired. And Jim had long hair. He had a full beard, hair on his back, big hairy chest, big pecs, arms, and he's sitting there on the stool with just a towel wrapped around him, smoking a cigarette. I'm thinking, welcome to the NFL. He just looked so bad. Bad meaning tough. It was just one of those things where as a rookie you walk in there and you're just kind of like, wow, I'm in awe. Hope I can make it. And they at that time, they had a 42-man roster. They had 5 tight ends on the depth chart. My name was number 5, and they only kept 2 at the time. Now some teams keep 4 and 5 tight ends, and they got a practice squad and all this other stuff where, basically every day I didn't know whether I was going home or going to practice, and like I said, I put a 5-pound weight in my jock. I was going to do whatever it took, so I kind of had the attitude, gosh, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And, again, I knew I could, since my mom and dad were both school teachers, they said, we want to teach people how to learn. We don't want to teach them things that they regurgitate on a test and then forget. So every road trip that we had was almost like a classroom, and my mom would ask questions. Okay, you're out in the woods, you got a pocket knife, 1 match, this, that, rope. What are you going to do first? I mean, she would challenge us to think, and then when I got to Green Bay, I'd sit by Lynn Dickey, the quarterback, in the meetings, and I learned what I did on the plays, but he would explain to me what the whole concept of the route was and what we were trying to do. Okay, you're running a crossing route. If the linebackers jump up on you, then we got, our wide receiver coming in behind you. If the free safety comes and jumps on him, we got James Lofton running through the middle of the field. So, here's what I'm reading first. So, I'm looking at you first. So, you try to get open quick. If not, then I'm moving to this. And then here's my third read. So, I felt like I benefited just from the knowledge that somebody like Lynn Dickey had. And during training camp, it's pretty much dog eat dog. I mean, the veterans aren't sharing much information because, you're there trying to take their job. But then once the season starts, we're a team. And, I do motivational speaking, and, I say, I wish Republican, Democrat would look, and say, okay, it's not about our side. It's not about your side. It's how can we, make America better? How can we make a difference, that we're on the same team, and, that's how the team works. And you look at the teams that win Super Bowls, and they got that concept. It's not about me. There's a great book out there called The Purpose Driven Life, and by a guy named Rick Warren. And the first sentence in the book says, "It's not about you." And in teams that are successful, they got that attitude, that concept. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make the team better. And but it is, great camaraderie, lot of gags, a lot of joking around, a lot of digging at it. You can't have thin skin in the locker room. I mean, you can't get offended because, somebody's going to say something, do something that, it's going to get under your skin a little bit. And, I always say you can't be controlled by the circumstances. You got to play above and rise above them if, you're going to be a contributor and come together as a team.
So how do you think the culture of football, specifically in the locker room and maybe on the field as well, has changed since you played? Do you think it's gotten better, worse, just different?
It's just gotten bigger than life. When I played at Green Bay, we could go out to a bar and have some drinks and nobody would bother you. You could go out to a restaurant. Now, the guys that are the starters, they have to make reservations in a back room, but it's just gotten so big. And obviously the money, like I said, I made $24,000 my first year. One player, Lynn Dickey, our quarterback, was the only player making close to $100,000 back then. Obviously in '82, when the strike happened and the USFL came in, there was bidding for players, and salaries went to $700,000-800,000. But now it's just crazy the amount of money that these guys can make in a short period of time, and with that adds the pressure, the judgment, the podcast, the cell phones. I'd hate to think if we had cell phones back in the day, and just everything, you're under a microscope every day. And I mean, we were a little bit, and but in Green Bay you couldn't get away. Everybody, they knew you, they knew your girlfriend, they knew your dog, what kind of car you drove. I mean, it's small town atmosphere, and but you could go out, you could do things, which I just don't see how the guys today make that happen.
Yeah. Do you enjoy watching the game today? And kind of a two-parter, how do you think you would have adapted your style to today's game?
I believe I would have been successful. I mean, I think I'm I was, might still be a better blocker than some of the tight ends today. I see them, spending more time getting out of the way, so they don't get hurt than blocking. I was head to head with Lawrence Taylor. He's lined up right over me. Hugh Green down in Tampa, Matt Blair over in Minnesota, Jimmy Williams in Detroit, the Bear defense, Otis Wilson, Wilbur Marshall, Mike Singletary. The tight ends were expected to block, back in the day, which you don't see that much anymore. But, and obviously I could get open and catch the ball. And, I had 11 touchdowns one year. And so, obviously it's all about performance. And, I believe I could adapt.
So do you enjoy watching the game today, or are you kind of like,
Oh, yeah.
it was better
Yeah.
when we played?
No, I enjoy watching. I mean, obviously, they're trying. I mean, guys are bigger, stronger, faster. Everybody when I played had a 300-pound guy, and he really wasn't that athletic or mobile. And then the Fridge came in, down in Chicago, and I mean, he's close to 350, and can do a 2.5 off the high dive, and 4.7, and then you got somebody like Reggie White, that's just a beast coming in there, and just over 300 pounds, and something's got to give. Your body just can't take that pounding from those many big people day out. So obviously they're trying to make the game safer. I remember some of the coaching points. Back in the day, the coach would go ear hole him, and basically you were to stick your helmet right in his ear hole. It's like, okay, there was no blind side hits. You looked for somebody that wasn't looking. My first couple years in the league, you running down on kickoff, somebody could cut you. They could block you below the waist. So yeah, they're trying to make it safer. You had people like Jack Tatum out in Oakland. His nickname was the Assassin. He made a living off of headhunting. And you can see, they played the Super Bowl against the Vikings, and he hits old Sammy White from the Vikings, and Sammy's helmet comes off. These are things that your listeners here can Google and look at. But they're trying to make it safer for people to play, and I understand that, but sometimes I look at it and go, golly, that's a little picky there. That's football. A big hit. That's why people like to watch it. They want to see that, and but obviously they want to see their stars week in and week out, and not on injured reserve.
So any good NFL fan knows about the huge rivalry the Packers have with the Bears, and proud to say how we own them. The Packers own the Bears. Obviously, during your time, it's a little bit different. That was a powerhouse. I think, what can you tell us about being able to play the legendary Bears defense back in the day?
Well, it was a challenge. I think we actually beat them maybe, I don't know, it was 81, 82, when they, we split with them there a couple years, and then they probably 84, 85, started getting the best of us, and 85 is when they won the Super Bowl. But, Buddy Ryan came up with that scheme. They had three guys, big guys in the middle, Hampton and Fridge and McMichael over your two guards and your center. And so it was hard to get people up on Singletary. He was behind those three guys, and obviously a smart guy that could run. And then they would take Richard Dent, move him clear out wide on the side away from the tight end. And his only job was go as fast as you can toward the quarterback. He didn't have run responsibility, and then they had two linebackers, Wilbur Marshall and Otis Wilson, lined up over the tight end, one on my right shoulder, one on my left. Most teams, you just got one linebacker there. Well, they had two. Well, their job was to mug the tight end, don't let him off the line of scrimmage, So I remember one game we're playing, and Lynn Dickey drops back a pass, and Richard Dent hits him in the back of the head, sacks him. I'm coming back to the huddle, and he's like, come here now. He goes, you got to get open. He goes, they're double teaming Lofton. JJ can't get off the press. I'm expecting you to get open. I said, look, I got Wilbur Marshall on one shoulder. I got Otis Wilson on the other. They're grabbing me and kicking me and tripping me. They're both bigger than me. They're stronger than me, and they're faster than me. Lynn goes, you're right. We're screwed. So,
I was expecting something motivational. That's hilarious.
You're right. You're right. We're screwed. No, but they basically, the old song, "Who Let the Dogs Out?" They're just coming, hard and fast, and obviously talented players, but you couldn't sustain drives against them, but they were susceptible to the big play. And when we did beat them, we would hit a couple big plays, during the game. And Bob Snelker, offensive coordinator, would try to come up with a good game plan, but you had to protect, and I mean, you saw the Super Bowl last year. I mean, the Eagles just squashed the Chiefs' front five guys, and Mahomes, no matter how good you are, if you don't have time, you're not going to be very successful. But it was a rivalry. I mean, but then again, when I played in the Pro Bowl, Dan Hampton, Mike Singletary, Walter Payton, all those guys were my teammates, and they're guys just like us. And, but it's fun to have a rivalry, I guess, but shoot, I mean, Minnesota was a rivalry too. And, I guess the old black and blue division.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of switching gears here, going back to the locker room and the atmosphere there, who do you think had your respect more than anyone else in your locker room during your playing years, and why?
Probably Larry McCarron. I mean, Larry, our center, didn't say much. His nickname was The Rock. No matter how early you got to the locker room, Larry was there. He got there early, and he was in the weight room. He'd get his weight workout in, and, when he was hurt, he got treatment. He didn't complain. He just showed up and played. I mean, I remember him playing with a broken foot one time. He, kind of just drag it into the training room. They'd tape him up, and he'd go out there. He actually one year during training during preseason games, he had a hernia, and he wore like this rubber girdle basically to hold his intestines in. And I think he had it operated on like last preseason game or second to last, and then 2 weeks later played the whole season with this rubber girdle on, and then after the season had it operated on again. But he was just beyond tough. Like I say, he grunted more than he talked. Yeah. I mean, so but he came prepared. He didn't make mental mistakes, and he was the Rock. He probably had more respect than anybody.
So in your time at Green Bay, how was your leadership handled on the team? Because Bart Starr was your coach, was it more player-driven, or was it more coach-enforced?
I think it was player-driven. I think, when Lombardi was there, everybody talks about, what a tyrant or, how tough he was. But I think Lombardi knew his players, probably some of them better than they knew themselves. They said he would come into a meeting, yell at Horning unmercifully. Well, with Horning, it went in one ear and out the other. He just kind of sat there and took it. But the rest of the team went, oh, crap, if he's going to yell at Horning like that, what's he going to do to me? So he would yell at Horning to get to the rest of the team. They said Max McGee was all about money. So if they were going to find Max, they waited till Monday, so that way it'd give him 6 days to get over being fined, and he would be ready to play. And, they said that he didn't yell at Bart because Bart was his leader on the team. And, he didn't want, to be berating Bart in front of everybody. So he called Bart into the office. And so I think think Bart kind of ran it like that. We had, James Lofton, he wasn't a vocal leader, but just so athletic, so smooth. Lynn Dickey was a little more vocal. Obviously the quarterback has an amount of respect, and then, Larry, with the team and the line. And, we had some guys, on defense, Mike Douglas, Rich Wingo, some of those guys. We really, I felt we were hamstrung by the organization in a way when we played. I was at an outing up in Sturgeon Bay, up in Door County, and I won't mention his name, but one of the front office people, had him get up and talk, and he said, yeah, the 70s and 80s were the years of mediocrity and futility. I'm thinking, wait a minute. You traded everything we had to get John Hadel, which didn't work out. We had Ted Hendricks here. You traded him. Mike Butler went to the USFL. Willie Buchanan ended up going to San Diego. I mean, and these were guys that, if they would have paid them $10,000, they ran it kind of like a business more than a football team. You bring in Holmgren and Wolf and you start running it like a football team. And now, you pay more money that's ever been paid before. Actually, unfortunately, like I said, I don't think they put Bart in position to succeed. They draft Rich Campbell, they draft Bruce Clark. Bruce told him, I'm not coming to Green Bay and playing nose guard. They draft him anyway. He leaves, goes to Canada, then goes to New Orleans. He's an all-pro defensive end. Rich Campbell comes out of Cal, and I mean, we receivers and quarterbacks, we could tell day one he couldn't throw the ball. And we're like, how does the scouting department do this? And then to spend a high number one pick, when you could have had, a Ronnie Lott, a Lawrence Taylor, but yet, they just really didn't put Bart in position to succeed, which, I felt bad for him. We had a great offense, but we just, couldn't stop anybody, as evident with the 83 Monday night game against the Redskins. We win 48-47, but Mosley misses a field goal at the end of the game. They would have beat us 50-48. You think 48 points is going to be enough, but so I felt bad for Bart. I think he might have been a little loyal to some people and coaches and stuff at one time, would be his only downfall. But he was an encouraging person, but he's not tough enough. Well, so then they bring in Forrest Gregg, who was the total opposite. There's a proverb in the Bible, says life and death are in the power of the tongue. You can encourage people with your words, or you can discourage people with your words. Bart was an encourager. Bart would challenge you as a man. He would say, you are better than this. I expect more out of you than that. Where Forrest was like, you stupid MF, I'm searching the effing waiver wires to replace your effing a-ho, and it's like, after a while, it just gets old. It just, goes in one ear and out the other because, what's he going to chew us out for today? But it was just so negative of an atmosphere. And, he challenged McCarron one time in front of the whole team, said, you're making too much money. And I'm thinking, gee, if anybody needs to be making more, it needs to be Larry, but, it just, he goes, I'm not going to be 8-8 around here anymore. So he gets rid of me, Lynn, Larry, Greg Cook, eventually James, Mike Douglas, guys who were leaders on the team, and he went 4-12. So he wasn't 8-8, and then he sneaks out in the middle of the night to go to SMU without even telling some of his assistant coaches. So it was just not a positive environment when they changed from Bart.
So in the time that you've been with the Packers versus what you see now, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming you think things are ran a little bit better now than they were back then. Is that true to say?
Oh, yeah. I think, the coaching staff, Gutekunst, front office, Mark Murphy, obviously an ex-player, he's stepped down now, but, obviously they are putting in people in position to succeed and, acquiring people, bringing people in that, fit their scheme. They're I mean, I very positive, obviously, from the Favre years and, even the Rodgers years. And, they had a lot of talent, and I believe they made sound decisions, not only front office wise, but, coaching wise. And, it's just, I played with the Chiefs. I live here in the Kansas City area. I played for the Vikings. My son, Chase, he played for Cincinnati. He played for Atlanta. He played for Seattle. He played for Tennessee. So we've been, as a family, been around a lot of different teams. And, the way Green Bay treats its alumni, its players, its fans, I've seen it from all angles. And there's nothing better than Green Bay, Wisconsin when it comes to professional football.
That's awesome. Only a couple more questions here for you. Again, I appreciate your time.
Oh, no problem. No problem. I'm not doing much today. I got to go out and mow in a little bit. So
you're a man of faith. Did you always have that faith when you played in the NFL?
Not really. Growing up in a small town, we went to a denominational church. We were there every Sunday. My mom taught Sunday school. My dad was, a deacon or whatever. And, but I never heard about being born again. I never heard about surrendering your life to Jesus Christ, that he is the way, the truth, and the life, that no one comes to the Father but by him. To me, it was like you go to church, you're, a pretty good person, you go out and do what you want, of course, young boy in a small town, you're exposed to beer at an early age, you're exposed to sex and girls at an early age, and Bible verse, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but to lose his soul? And the world is enticing, it's fun, exciting, it's new, it's scary, and it's like it has a lot to offer. And then you move on to all my Catholic buddies would go to mass on game day and we would win. So I started going to mass with on every Friday morning. I'd go to mass with my Catholic buddies and sit through it thinking God was kind of a big Santa Claus. If I did the right thing, if I went to mass, if I went to church, if I said a prayer, then he would help me win and help me play. And so then I go to Kansas State as a walk-on, big place. I wanted God, my Santa Claus God, to help me make the team. So I went to the Fellowship of Christian Athletes Bible study, and they were talking about John 3:3, third chapter, third verse in the book of John. Unless a man is born again, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. And it's like, I've heard about these born again people, and it never had a positive connotation to it. And it was explained to me that, just as Jesus prayed before he went to the cross, Father, not my will be done, but thy will be done. And it's like, well, Lord, my will is to play, in college, to be successful. My will is to go to the NFL. My will is, to have this girl as my girlfriend. And, so, it's like, I don't know if I want to surrender my will, as a young man, you kind of view, well, it's about do's and don'ts, well, I can't go out to the bars anymore. I can't, chase the girls. I can't cuss. I have to do this. I have to read, I was kind of looking at it as do's and don't, but it's like, well, if it says it, they say a prayer, ask Christ in your life. It's like, well, okay, no brainer. I'll do that, but the whole surrender thing didn't register with me. It's like I said prayer. Some people say, well, if you ask Christ in your life, he's there. But really, I was enjoying the pleasures of sin. I was enjoying the world. There was no conviction in me that, I wasn't doing the right thing. I actually had a friend in college that he and I played on K-State's football team, and he said a prayer about the same time I did. We were living the same lifestyle, but he was convicted. He felt, gosh, I can't be doing this, peer pressure obviously plays into it a lot. I believe he was saved. I don't believe I was at that time. I had a knowledge of God. I knew who Jesus was, what he had done, and that he was the way, the truth, and the life, but I wasn't ready to surrender. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in control. And of course, when I went to Green Bay as a walk-on, I went to I can't even remember, Athletes in Action. A guy by the name of Steve Newman was with the Athletes in Action Bible study. And I, again, wanted God to help me make the team. So I went there. Well, Steve started praying for me at that point. And then I made the team. And, then I became a starter. By my 5th year, I'm in the Pro Bowl. My 25,000 went to over 250,000. I had a red convertible Porsche. Life's good, and again, but what does it profit a man to gain the whole world, but to lose his soul? And, that's kind of where I was. Well, my wife, Amy, who I've been married to for 40 years, she was my girlfriend. She was down in Wichita, Kansas, working, and she calls me up one night and says, hey, I went to this Bible study tonight, and they're talking about being saved. She goes, it just sounds so abstract, saved. She goes, I called my dad. He couldn't explain it to you. I called my sister, called my friend, because I figured I'd call you. Well, all of a sudden, conviction kind of fell all over me, and I explained to her what it meant to be saved. And basically, I wasn't walking with the Lord. I might not have even been saved, but I led her to the Lord. We get married. She comes up to Green Bay the next year, and we go to Athletes in Action, Steve Newman's Bible study. And then we moved back to Kansas City in the off season. And my friend Gary Spaney from college was actually playing for the Chiefs, and he had recommitted his life to Christ and started going to church with him. And but that's one night they had an altar call, and it's like I went up, and it's like I'm ready to surrender. Say, not my will be done, but thy will be done. And went back to Green Bay the following year, and that's when all of us got cut. And so it's like, okay, Lord, so. But I think in a spiritual sense, it was good because I came back, played for the Chiefs. I was able to go to the church where I committed my life to the Lord, kind of grow in my relationship with him. When I played for Kansas City, I thought it'd be a good place for me to go because the tight ends weren't catching many passes. Well, I found out why they weren't catching many passes. They didn't throw them many passes. So I was kind of relegated. Actually, I said, hey, just put me on special teams. I led the team in tackles on special teams in 1986 with the Kansas City Chiefs. And so instead of being a star like in Green Bay, a featured tight end, I was more of a servant. And I think that kind of plays into my spiritual life, that it's like, I'll give you your football back, but I'm going to give it to you in a different capacity where you're not the guy scoring touchdowns. You're going to be running down on special teams. And, but I just tried to glorify him in that and led the team in tackles on kickoffs and punts. So, that's kind of how my spiritual life evolved. And
how do you think your playing experience would have been in Green Bay had you been saved earlier during that time? Do you think your play would have been any different? Do you think obviously your lifestyle could have definitely been different, but what do you think the major differences could have been?
I've often thought about that because I was kind of a wild guy. I mean,
But I'm assuming that helped you be a great player, right?
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of my attitude on the field too. It's like, okay, I got in at 3 this morning. I got to get up at 7. I'm going to do it. I'm going to gut it through. I mean, just the wild man attitude on. And people would tell me, they go, "What are you going to do when you're done playing football?" I'd go, "Die." What else is there? I mean, that was kind of my attitude. That hey, if I die on the field, that'd be perfect. That's and it was kind of a surrender your body, just give it up for the team. But now all of a sudden I got a wife, I got 2 kids. I mean, there was more important things in life to me than football at that point. I don't know if my play went downhill because I got older or just because football wasn't my God anymore. It isn't what I serve. I serve Jesus Christ, and his will, not my will. And I want to be the best father, the best husband I can be, the best person in the community I can be, to give back, because because I felt like I was just so blessed through my life. Through my dad was my stepdad, but I called him dad. He was the school teacher and the farmer. He gave so much to me, gave me his name, adopted me, as a son, just as we're adopted by Christ. We're illegitimate, we're sinners, but yet he paid price. He stepped down and adopted us, gave us his name as a Christian. And, so I kind of look at that experience with my stepdad as related to my heavenly father.
Yeah, that's awesome.